Hey guys, my name is Haley and today I'm going to be filming my March wrap-up, which I actually read a decent amount this month compared to the last couple of months of the year, so I'm going to get right on into it. So the first book that I read kind of put me in a slump because I did not enjoy it. It was also an audiobook, and I have not been reading audiobooks well at all this year, let alone reading well. And that was Tender as the Flesh. I picked this up because every horror booktuber ever was talking about how interesting this was as a premise, because it is like a dystopian sort of world where we have started to treat certain humans the way we treat cattle or like the meat industry, especially in America. So like giving them growth hormones and like keeping them in cages, and they don't live a real life. They're not considered human. They're not considered real animals. And so basically it is the world has accepted cannibalism because they're not real humans, which sounds like a really interesting premise. And I did really like the first 20% of this. It is very gory. If you don't like gore, don't read this. And I did like the social commentary, but the vast majority of it was about this one man and this girl who he is trying to save from the industry, which just was not the direction I wanted the story to go at all. Like, I just wanted more of the social commentary and like how people, like regular people, reacted to this, and I really only got like just this man's perspective and like some people he talks to at work, and that was it. So I wanted more of the world. I feel like it was too small of a scope for what I wanted out of this book, for how interesting that premise is. So I ended up giving this 2.5 stars. Not my favorite, but it was an interesting read nonetheless. Next up, I read a middle grade. I haven't read a middle grade book in probably several years, to be completely honest, and that is Front Desk. I picked this up because of someone that I've watched on BookTube for a while who does read like a decent amount of middle grade, and she highly recommended this one as a good commentary on Asian Americans and the racism that ensues from being Asian American or any sort of minority, especially in America. And for a middle grade, this book made me furious of how the way that this family was treated. It's this little girl comes to America with her mother and father, and her mom and dad are having trouble getting work, so they accept this really kind of sketchy work situation just because they need the money, and they're here to like figure out the American dream, and like they're starting to realize maybe the American dream isn't real or isn't attainable for people like them. And it's just like, it was so interesting seeing the story from the perspective of the little girl who doesn't really know what a lot of the things mean. Like, there's a big part of this where they're talking about loan sharks, and she thinks that they are little sharks instead of like people that are like taking advantage of people who are down on their luck and need to be loaned money in order to survive. So seeing all of these microaggressions and like racist tendencies from the perspective of, I think she's like 10 or 11, was a very interesting perspective to view this from. And me, obviously, as an adult, made me furious to see how this family was treated and the way that all of these Asian Americans were treated in this situation. I also did not know going into this that it's a series, but I might read the other books because I really like this. I really like the characters. They work in like a motel, and there are long haulers that live there, so people who basically live in the motel and just pay monthly or weekly or whatever. And this little group of friends, a lot of them, and like there's a whole bunch of talk about racism in general. And it's just a really both infuriating story because these things obviously do happen in real life, but also a very heartwarming story because it's a middle grade, and that's kind of like what you expect to get going into these kinds of books. But I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. I'm probably going to read the rest of the series, probably not binge it, but I will keep them on my radar. And then keeping up with my theme of reading a book a month from this series, I read Forever Wild, which is the sequel novella. I think it's like 2.5 in the Simple Wild series. I'm a huge fan of Kala. I relate to her at a lot of levels, and Jonah is just, at this point, I love them and their dynamics so much, that, and like the little town that they're in Alaska and them trying to build their life together now, I love it so much. I gave this 5 stars. It's like a 150-page novella. If she ever writes more in this series, I will gladly read them because I love Jonah and Kala that much, and this like small town setting in Alaska. If you know of any other books set in Alaska that are like kind of like contemporary romances, please let me know because I've been a huge fan of this series this year. And then I finally read The Minders by John Mars. This is his book that came out this year. It came out in February. I ended up getting it at the end of January, and because I haven't been reading, I did not read it. I didn't even read it physically, even though I bought it physically, but I ended up reading it on ebook because that's apparently the only way I'm reading right now. I don't know why that makes sense in my brain, but apparently it does. And I would like to preface this with the fact that if you want to read a lot of John Mars and you have not read The Passengers or The One, read both of those before going into this, because this low-key spoils both of them like pretty hard within the first 50 pages. And I was shocked because I didn't know it was even remotely related to his books. Like, those are the only two. I've read all of John Mars's books. I have a whole video about his books down below and like little synopsis on each of them. So if you would like to look at that, I will link that down below. The only ones of his that I thought might be remotely related are The One and The Passengers, and this confirms that they are, and this is also set in the same world. And the premise of this one is that it is set after the events of both of those, and the concept of The One still plays a big part in this, and the events of the end of The Passengers also plays a big part in setting this book off specifically. So basically the British government is having a lot of issues with cybersecurity, and so they choose to microchip these tiny little things, put them into people's brains, put them into a witness protection program, I can't talk, and basically try to get them to lie low while they try and fix their cybersecurity for the whole country, and that way the country's secrets won't get out. And obviously, as you can imagine, by putting cybersecurity, really important information into people's brains that they can access, but it's like more in their subconscious, it kind of backfires, and some people react well, some people don't, and we go from there. It was really interesting, I'm not gonna lie. It's not my favorite premise of his. Like, I really prefer the concept of The One, so I was happy that that took place in this book as well. But I give this a 4 stars. It's still a super solid John Mars book, just not my favorite of the like 8 books of his that I've read at this point. And then these next 2 books I have binged in the last 2 days, one of which I did not mean to binge at all. The first of those being The Strange Weather in Tokyo. This is just a Japanese literature book that I've been meaning to read for years because Kate read it years ago and it always sounded interesting to me. It is about a girl who is now in her like late 30s, 40s, and then she comes across someone who used to be her teacher years and years and years ago. So there's a bit of an age gap going on here, but because they're older and because both of them are so lonely, it doesn't feel creepy to me. Like, she does call him sensei because he was her teacher, and that is Japanese culture. And it is a very slow burn, like it takes place over a long period of time. And it eventually made sense. I was a little bit weirded out once I realized the direction it was going, but by the time it happened, I was okay with it. Also, the ending was so upsetting. But I did enjoy this. I gave it a 3.5 stars. Is it my favorite book ever? No. Do I really like reading more about Japanese culture? Yes. And then last, I finally have a favorite book of the year, alongside Catfishing on Catnet, which is probably second right now because I'm not reading very much. I think I'm at like 15 books right now, and we're 3 months into the year. It's fine. But the book I started last night on my Kindle thinking I was going to read like a chapter or 2 of it, and then accidentally binged the entire thing because I was obsessed with it. That is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I have read one other Alice Oseman. It was I Was Born for This, which I read 2 summers ago, and I really liked it. She's very good at like understanding fandom culture, and like I Was Born for This was about a boy band and like a girl meeting her best friend that she made friends with on the internet, and if you know me and Kate, that is like literally us, so it was very like relatable. This one wasn't as relatable to me besides the fandom culture. I think she hit the fandom culture thing like on the head with this book. It's about this girl loves this podcast, which is very reminiscent of Welcome to Night Vale. It's been a while since I talked about them on my channel, but I have the Welcome to Night Vale books. I did listen to the podcast of Welcome to Night Vale forever, like for a year or 2. I haven't caught up with it in a while. I'm very behind. I don't know if I will ever go back to it, but I love that world that they created. And there's this guy on YouTube. He has created this podcast thing called Universe City, and it's a pun on the word university. It is set in London, and it's a very like just talk show kind of creepy wacky world with superpowers world, and it's this girl's favorite thing. She kind of accidentally finds out who the creator is even though it's a secret. And my favorite thing about this is that you go into it thinking it's kind of going to be a romance. Like, it's almost set up like, okay, we're going to get a romance between this girl and this guy because it's a girl and a guy, and that's not what happens at all. They just like form a very, very strong friendship, and I absolutely love that. There's also so much like very excellent representation in this for both sexuality and race. There's also a ton of references because it's British and like contemporary. There's a ton of references to like pop culture and like YouTube and like Tumblr. Like Tumblr's a big part of the story. As someone who grew up on Tumblr as a teenager, like I very much related to that fandom culture side of things, as well as YouTube. Obviously, I have a YouTube channel and have been here for a long time and have been watching it for even longer. And then a lot of even shows, like they mentioned Doctor Who a lot, they mentioned Supernatural a lot, and as I'm rewatching Supernatural right now, that was really fun for me. But I loved the way this story played out. It read really, really fast to me. Like there's a bit of a mystery going on, there's a lot of fandom culture going on, there's a lot of drama going on, but it all felt very realistic to me, and I loved the way it played out. Again, I did not mean to binge this last night. I meant to start it just so I would be reading something, and I accidentally read the whole thing in like 2 or 3 hours. So this is my favorite book of the year so far. And now at the end of these wrap-ups, I'm gonna start doing my TV show wrap-ups of the month, mainly because my video of like what I've been watching did not do well. I think YouTube just, the algorithm doesn't like things that are not what's normally on your channel, which is one of my pet peeves with YouTube, but obviously I'm aware of it. So I'm just gonna throw little like bits of my comments on TV that I'm watching at the end of my books wrap-ups. So if you don't care about TV, goodbye. Those are all the books that I read this month. If you do care a little bit about TV, I'm going to talk about Supernatural for probably about 5 minutes. So, Supernatural. I've been watching it live since probably season 8. And I had binged the first 8 seasons because it was one of the shows that was talked about on Tumblr. So I've been watching it for a very long time. Probably since like 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. When I was like getting into Sherlock and Doctor Who and Supernatural, I got into all of them at the same time. And as I mentioned in my favorite fictional characters of all time, one of my favorite fictional characters of all time is in the series, and that is Castiel. Castiel does not come in until season 4. So I have gone through seasons 1 through 5. Season 1 is very like monster of the weeky, not my favorite, but I love Sam and Dean. Dean specifically is probably my second favorite character in the show. I love him. I love his like carefree attitude, but also he really does have emotions. He just likes to hide them. Like he's just like my favorite character archetype. And I love season 1 and 2. I love rewatching this and being able to like I remember huge plot points but not little ones, which has been really interesting on this rewatch because obviously there's like 22 episodes a season and there's 15 seasons. That's a lot of TV. And there's a lot of stuff I still very vividly remember. Like I am in season 5 now, and in my opinion, season 5 kind of feels like a fever dream. If you've ever watched Supernatural, you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of breaking the fourth wall in season 5, plus the addition of angels, aka Castiel, amongst other angels. There's an apocalypse going on. So what I'm finding the most fascinating about the rewatch, specifically in season 5, is that once the angels get introduced, we also are introduced to the idea of we're trying to prevent an apocalypse, like the end of the world, biblical apocalypse. And so they're using a lot of biblical references. When I first watched this was before I got into church, like long before, when I first watched the season specifically. So I didn't really like know what any of these biblical references were, but as they're mentioning them now, I know what they're talking about. I've obviously read the Bible several times at this point. I've studied it. I know a lot about Revelation. I've read the Left Behind series, so I know a lot about Revelation through that. And it's absolutely fascinating to see their interpretation of these end times prophecies and what they could mean. And it's so much fun. That's making season 5 has always been my favorite season, but it's making it even more exciting for me this time around because I kind of know what's going on and I know what they're referencing, which is always a fun time. Yeah, I'm like 3/4 of the way through season 5. I'm probably gonna finish it today after filming this. I meant to finish it last night, but I accidentally binged a book, so it's fine. But yeah, I think I'm probably gonna try to watch at least like another show before I jump back into Supernatural after finishing season 5, because season 5 is a good break in the show to like take a break and watch something else quick and then come back to it because of the way the season ends, which I do very vividly remember. Don't worry, you're not just gonna hear me talking about Supernatural for the next 3 months, hopefully. But yeah, that is everything I read and watched in the month of March. I feel like I got a lot done this month, even though most of it I got done in the last like week and a half rather than the rest of the month. Oh, I also just scheduled my first COVID vaccine shot last night. We just became eligible in Ohio, and I'm so excited. Like, the general public became eligible, and I'm so beyond excited. Like, it's about time and I can finally like go plan things. Me and Kate have started planning things, and I'm pumped to finally get some hope within this pandemic we've been stuck in for an entire year. Let me know what you read this month down below. If you've watched any TV, I would love to hear any recommendations or comments down below as well. Thank you all for watching, and I will see all of you guys next time.